Hey, you. You're finally awake. You were trying to go back to 2023, right? Walked right into that trap known as real life. Same as us. And that Sony pony over there.
Damn you, Baldur's Gate 3! Gaming was fine until you came along. Games were nice and slow and easy and played like movies. If it wasn't for you, PlayStation could keep making all these cinematic games and take all the awards without any competition. Hey, you and me, let's go back to PS5 exclusives and leave these fakers behind.
No! We're all real gamers now, you filthy peasant.
No!
Shut up back there.
2023 was pretty great, not gonna lie. So many great games came out that a lot of people really hyped up to an nth degree, and bickered about endlessly all over the internet. Baldur's Gate 3, Spider-Man 2, Hogwarts Legacy, Starfield, Hi-Fi Rush, Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, Super Mario Wonder, Alan Wake 2, Lord of the Rings Gollum. Okay, but for real, most of these games I just mentioned won't be on this list.
I like where this is going.
But you know what that means. This list will be full of interesting things that you may or may not have heard about, which in my opinion is a much better purpose for lists like these, rather than just confirming the biases of certain fans, like some stupid corpo award show that means nothing to people who actually play games.
And the Game Award goes to Alan Wake 2.
That's a bit sussy.
The Game Award goes to... Shut up. Shut up.
No, you.
Cyberpunk 2077.
The best game goes to The Last of Us.
Shut the fuck up. You're a fucking
Anyway, this video is obviously going to be very long, and if you've seen previous Games of the Year videos from me, you'll know what to expect. Remasters are excluded. Dishonorable mentions will be first, and any honorable mentions will be squeezed in wherever they would fit if they were on the list. Not many this time, but you'll see. And you know what? Let's start by bringing up one game that doesn't really deserve its own slot. Genshin Impact. Yeah, I was totally addicted, but fortunately, back in February, I've completely cut it out of my life. Straight cold turkey. Praise me. And spit on the gacha game. And its fanbase. Now, let's move on. Forever. Here is my list from worst to best of my top games of 2023. This dishonorable mention pains me. Indie games tend to get a pass on a lot of things from me, like Potion Permit from last year, which I still included on my list, even though I thought the game was pretty bad, it still was fairly competently made. Candle Knight, on the other hand, there's so much to love with this game's concept, but it fell apart very quickly as I played it. It's a Metroidvania with painful combat, tons of bugs, and worst of all, no map. Keep that last one in mind. The normal enemies were harder than the early bosses for some reason, but you get used to it. And then once you get to a boss, whether or not you win is based on whether or not they glitch out completely. I had to restart the second boss like 6 times just to beat it. Eventually, I got tired of the game's mediocre platforming segments that I put the game down for a while, only to come back to it months later, having no fucking idea what I was doing or where I was supposed to go because there's no map or anything to point you in any direction whatsoever. So after wandering around for a while, I just gave up. Top it off with no rebindable controls and a bizarrely high GPU usage and other performance issues for such a simplistic looking game, and it just ended up not being worth it. It's such a shame too, because the game has a nice style to it that I really like. Sea of Stars. I know some people aren't going to be happy with this, but I could not muster the will to finish this game. Despite that, I fully understand why people praise it so highly. It's one of, if not the best looking games of the year without question, despite being a pixel art game. The music is fantastic and the world seems to be designed very, very well. So what stopped me from playing it after 10 hours or so? The characters. I didn't care for any of them, and I don't really like most of their designs. The story. I saw each twist coming a mile away, and nothing that happened hooked me. But the main thing that drove me off the most is that the gameplay, specifically the combat, is tedious as hell. Everything is so slow, repetitive, and boring, and I tried to get by with avoiding as many random battles as I could, but the game just doesn't let you in most places. Suffice to say, the most important aspect of the game just didn't click with me, and I didn't enjoy actually playing the game all that much. Maybe that's due to me being a latecomer in the JRPG genre, so I have no nostalgia of any JRPGs that came before the 2000s, but oh well. Maybe I can be convinced to continue playing it on stream. Who knows? This game was damn close to getting a dishonorable mention for me, but I want to make it very clear. Vernal Edge is not a bad game. It's just one of the most frustrating experiences I've had in quite a while, and it's almost entirely a me problem, not a problem with the game. Almost. First, I started the game on hard mode. That was a mistake. It didn't get unbearable until about halfway through the game, but it wouldn't let me change it without starting the entire game over. So I just grit my teeth and got through most of it until I had enough, and edited my save file on PC to put it on normal. The noob! This game's combat has a lot of really good ideas that have a lot of small, annoying control issues that hold it back because they lead to you getting killed. Auto dash on certain attacks, hit stun, inconsistent hitboxes, and the growing impatience of having to fight the same enemies over and over and over again. I even died against a boss a second after I beat it because of some oversight and the game's forced cinematic slowdown. I was so mad, just saying. The game's sound effects are probably some of the worst I've ever heard for a game like this, which is not something I normally would complain about, but there's such a massive lack of audio feedback in combat that it was instantly noticeable. If you can get it down, it can actually be pretty fun because you have quite a lot of movement and traversal options that get you around the battlefield quickly. And outside of combat, it's quite fun to use them to explore around the floating islands that the game is set on. It's not very rewarding compared to other Metroidvanias, as the game is pretty dull to look at in most regions, and the more interesting rewards are few and far between. The characters are at least somewhat entertaining throughout the game, with the main character taking the silly idiot hero role, but I didn't find the story all that interesting overall. Really, the only reason I actually finished this game was stubbornness. It was the first game in ages that made me say out loud, I hate this game, so congratulations. Fortunately, there were a lot more Metroidvanias I enjoyed in 2023, more than Vernal Edge, but, well, this next one's got its own share of issues. Curse of the Sea Rats is about a British Navy flagship in the 1800s or something, who capture a group of pirates, including the pirate witch Flora Byrne, who curses all of them and turns everyone into rats. Their ship crashes on an island off the coast of Ireland where the entire game takes place, and it's up to you to rescue the son of the admiral in exchange for your freedom, as you play as one of the 4 other prisoners that were on the ship. The story was, honestly, not that special. A few historical references doesn't warrant the story-rich tag on Steam, just saying, but it's still a charming experience with a gaggle of cartoony characters, especially the villains. As for the gameplay, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's another one of those games that definitely looks better than it plays, as everything is very well animated, but it comes at the cost of fluidity. Combat is very stiff with every character and not very fun. Then you unlock a certain perk with a certain character that allows you to heal as you attack, and the rest of the game becomes an absolute cakewalk. Which was fine for me, because exploring the nicely detailed locations in a non-linear fashion, digging up the game's hidden random treasures with some very nice music, was the best aspect of the game. Then, towards the end and without warning, they had to go and ruin it by taking away your fast travel, blocking off certain pathways, and forcing you to go from one end of the map to the other, and then the game rewards you at the end with sequel bait. Why they thought this was a good idea is beyond me, because it's getting critiqued pretty hard in the reviews, but oh well. It has up to 4-player couch co-op, so if you like that, you'll probably enjoy it more than I did. Want to simulate an environmentalist's wet dream for a day or two? Play Terra Nil, a sim game where you go to a desolate planet and revive the ecosystem. It's a simple game with a simple concept. Start with a power source, which is usually a wind turbine. Use it to detoxify the surrounding landscape and make it green again. Bring back water sources and recreate the nature of 4 different biomes. There's a few more steps you have to take to make forests, swamps, and stuff like that, but the concept remains fairly simple throughout the game, and the game's limitations make it feel more like a puzzle game. Even if you mess up along the way, the end result usually looks better than you expect, and is very satisfying to behold, but sometimes you will get stuck and have to restart a map because there's no delete function. Unfortunately, the game is fairly light on content, and you will probably complete all 8 maps in under 10 hours, but it was an enjoyable game overall. Sometimes I just want to relax, with a nice pretty casual platformer thing where you just take in the visual spectacle of everything like Journey, Stray, and stuff along those lines. So I tried a game called After Us. Not related. What I got instead was a depressing as hell misery simulator for environmentalists. God damn it, this is going to be a theme in this year's games, isn't it? Well, the story here is that humanity turned into these mutant things called Devourers, and the evil nasty oil substance has corrupted everything, and it all just looks drab and hideous. Your duty is to find all the dead greater animal spirits and revive them so life can be brought back to the world. Pretty simple. Along the way, you come across memories of people from before everything went to shit that, I don't really know. I got some mixed messaging from these things, so I don't really know what the point was for most of them. All that said, I have to give it praise where it's due. The game is still very well designed, with each region having a unique gimmick to them, so it never feels like it's dragging on too long, despite being a lot longer than others of its kind. You can maybe speed through it in like 4 to 5 hours, or if you want to find everything like I did, it will take around 10 or more. Every now and then, the game also takes on a bit of a horror vibe reminiscent of Little Nightmares, with all the garbage you're meant to traverse around and the way the Devourers try to catch you. The combat in these parts is fairly weak, but there isn't a whole lot of it, so it's kind of forgivable. Overall, I still enjoyed the game despite not getting what I expected, but no keyboard support on PC is a grave sin. Far worse than destroying the world with pollution, just saying. I literally cannot show the next game on this video because it's an adults-only game, so I'll make this quick. Scarlet Maiden is well, it's one of those games you just don't take seriously because it doesn't take itself seriously. The chances of you actually busting a nut to this game are very low. I hope. But the main reason I played it in the first place was that while I was doing research for new game releases for my RNG series, I noticed it actually looked like a very competent game, and when I played it, I actually had fun. It's a 2D action platformer roguelite with hints of Metroidvania gameplay in it, so it was right up my alley, as it was similar in structure to Little Noah from 2022, a game I really loved. But this one is much more simple, and will similarly only last you like 4 hours if you're competent enough. I thought it was pretty easy at least, but the game doesn't let you play hard mode until after you beat it. Stop doing this, developers, please, for fuck's sake. Also, no rebindable controls for controllers. Stop that too. Anyway, give it a bust. I mean, give it a look if you want a little distraction. "2023 gave us a successor to SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom, which is one of the best 3D platformers ever made. No joke. So how does SpongeBob Cosmic Shake hold up? It is solid. You have similar elements to those older games in how everything works: platforming, combat, level structure, except this game has completely new abilities for our little spongy hero that give it its own identity. The downside is that you only control SpongeBob and nobody else, so despite all the new additions, it doesn't have quite the variation of the other games. This is especially noticeable because of how linear the levels are, similar to the SpongeBob movie game, and how combat is fairly weak and repetitive due to the lacking variety of enemies. Bosses are fairly weak too. But the game still shines in other areas, like the visual design of each level being very well crafted, and all the silly and even more obscure references to the series throughout each one will put a smile on your face. You'll feel right at home if you've ever been a fan of the series, and it's a worthy addition to the lineup of 3D platformers. I didn't play any of the previous SteamWorld games, but this casual city builder called SteamWorld Build definitely got me interested. It's a fusion of Wild West and sci-fi themes with an emphasis on mining, where the goal is to unearth the lost spaceship parts to allow the main characters to leave the planet, due to it being increasingly unfit for them. The story is pretty endearing, but not very essential, as it's copy-pasted into each of the 5 stages in the game, meaning if you beat only one, which will normally take around 8 to 10 hours, you beat the game. I played through every stage once, with the last 3 on the hardest difficulty, but even that wasn't much of a challenge, but that's okay. This was a relaxing casual game after all. The only time the game gets intense is when you mine down to the deepest layer, where a bunch of robo-zombies can mow through your machines and your brain-dead AI guards if you're not careful, but only on hard mode really. It could use some more content, but I still enjoyed it. The game also surprised me by running incredibly well on my PC, even when I cranked it up to 1440p, despite technically having up to 4 layers of stuff going on at any given time. I could easily recommend it to fans of this genre who just want a casual game to pass the time with. Just be wary of the devs because they got caught data harvesting players of it, though it seems they did backtrack on that thankfully. I'm starting to really get the appeal of roguelite games. The way they change slightly over time as you continue to play and unlock things after each time you get sent back to the start is always kinda interesting, but sometimes it feels like the developers also use this setup to be able to create a game with deceptively little content. And this is how I felt after playing Astral Ascent, a game that has some very, very positive reception in spite of this. Usually you have multiple ways of buffing your abilities after each run, but this game forces you to unlock features one by one, so everything isn't available early on, including 2 of the playable characters. Seemed like padding to me, but That's a very small complaint when put up against the game's positives. For example, the combat is extremely fun and fluid, and your abilities can vary wildly from one playthrough to the next. There's no shortage of different spells, buffs, and abilities to use, and since it's a roguelite, it will be pretty random, which will force you to try something new every now and then. There's 12 different bosses and a handful of optional mini-bosses, and the final boss, so there's quite a bit that can keep you occupied for a while. But due to being a fairly fast-paced game, the amount of variation doesn't make up for the onset of repetition. The only other annoying thing is that you will beat the final boss fairly quickly. But the game forces you back to the beginning to beat 6 more runs with increasing difficulty, and fight him 6 more times just to get to the ending. So there's that problem roguelites have in my experience, where there isn't really that much content here when you strip it down. But once you beat it the 6th time, you unlock a bunch more options to make the game even more challenging and more rewarding, so at least there's a lot more replayability here than some of the others I've played. It's Metroidvania time again, and next on the list is 9 Years of Shadows. This game is absolutely beautiful, possibly one of the best looking pixel art Metroidvanias ever made, and anyone who loves the classic Castlevanias will feel right at home here. The story is pretty minimal, like most games of this genre, and the music is very unique for this type of game, fusing electronic music with fantasy themes. Aside from that though, the game operates in a very typical Metroidvania fashion, so you know what you're getting into. One major difference is how your HP works. You only have a few hit points, but most damage is absorbed by your ghostly teddy bear companion, and when his shield energy runs out, you have to stop and charge it by giving him a little squeeze. Isn't that adorable? Might seem like a potentially frustrating mechanic at first, but the game isn't very difficult overall, so it's not a big deal in my eyes. What was more annoying was the fact that your dash maneuver is backdash only, which was really annoying after coming off playing other games where you dash in whatever direction you're pointing, like Infernal Edge. I know the classic games do the backdash thing, but can we all just move on from it, please? Just asking. Anyway, solid game, and I wouldn't mind seeing a follow-up. I have decided once again to torture myself with another Neptunia game. The last time I played one, it was the super disappointing Super Neptunia RPG all the way back in 2019, and I decided to skip out on the cheap spin-offs that came out after that, probably for the best. They look like below average action games, because this company cannot do action games competently at all. In 2023, we got Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters, which is also an action RPG. Oh boy, here we go. This is the first Neptunia game to star Nepgear as the main character since quite a long time ago, which is perfect for me because I love Nepgear and Uni, and I've wanted to see them get a new adventure for some time. The story starts as the 4 main goddesses leave to the PC continent to investigate a disturbance. Meanwhile, the 4 younger sisters go out on a quest of their own and discover a hidden research facility with a mysterious girl contained within a crystal thing. When they release her from it, however, they get trapped in it for 2 years. When they awaken, they find that their world is a bit different. All of their people are glued to their R phones, monsters called trendies are running amok, and faith in the goddesses has dwindled over time, with Neptune missing in action as the PC continent they were on has vanished. It's up to Nepgear and the others to win back the hearts of the people and put a stop to the discord that has taken over the world. The story moves like most Neptunia games do, with silly references to the real-life game industry, console wars, and social media, portrayed through the adorably ridiculous cast of the series, but also has a surprisingly complicated story with some dark and serious moments. These games have tons of visual novel-like cutscenes, enough to make the actual gameplay feel secondary, and when you get your hands on the gameplay, it certainly feels secondary. Like this game tried to do a knockoff of the Tales of series for its battle system, or at least that's the impression I get from it, but it just doesn't feel good. It's much more forgiving, allowing you to pretty much button mash your way through the game, especially if you decide to do the side quests or grind even a little bit, because you'll be insanely overleveled by the time you're done. Each location you visit is also recycled like in previous games, making the game more repetitive than it should be, and forcing you to rely on the map to find your way around some areas, with the same enemies we've seen in every Neptunia game yet again. It does look much better than previous games at least, with improved character animations and environments, but I wish they would step it up in the gameplay department, because there's an entire universe that already has plenty to work with to make a more detailed internally and externally consistent overworld. And then I got to a certain point in the game, and unlocked an extremely large, very detailed, but somewhat empty location that looks like a placeholder for something amazing in the future that they might have planned. I don't want to spoil it, but I guess we'll have to wait and see if it actually happens. Next, we have the game that's the reason for this video being so late. It was a Christmas gift, and I was brutally, savagely, painfully forced against my will to finish it before making it. Super Mario RPG. Yes, I'm including this one even though it's basically the same game as the original, but with a bunch of improvements, such as being remade from the ground up in a very colorful and charming art style. All the Mario characters are reimagined with a style inspired by the original Super Mario RPG, and they all look so adorable, especially Peach. Plus, the game had a lot more really funny moments than I expected. It's hard not to love it. I only played a little bit of the original Mario RPG, so this was a somewhat fresh experience for me, while still feeling very familiar because I've played the first 3 Paper Mario games. It is definitely on the easier and shorter side compared to other RPGs though, so at times I felt like I was just steamrolling through the game with barely any effort despite skipping a lot of the combat and EXP. Probably would have enjoyed this game a lot more if I actually gave it a second chance back in the day. I also stream this game, so you can check out my playthrough if you're into that kind of mid-content. Also, Geno still shouldn't be in Smash. Remember all those highly acclaimed games I mentioned in the intro? Well, here's the first one, and it isn't even in the top 10. Super Mario Wonder. Yep. After playing this and Mario RPG on stream, I think I liked this one just a little bit more. I've been playing Mario platformers since I was like 2 or 3 years old, so I admittedly have more of a soft spot for them. While RPGs I tend to be highly critical of, but I tried to put that aside and be fair, but this game still comes out on top because holy crap, this was an insane fever dream. Every level has a segment that throws the already well-designed stage into a mushroom-infused frenzy, and my god, this game is just pure fun in classic video game form with a modern twist that's really impressive. The amount of jokes we made on stream about doing drugs and getting high as fuck every time we touch a Wonder Flower, or jokes about a lot of the other ridiculous things in this game that only those with a corrupted internet meme brain would notice. It just made for a hilarious experience.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
There are some things holding it back in my opinion, which is why it isn't higher on the list, a lot of which are small nitpicks, such as a few levels feeling like more of the same from previous games, those levels that force you to wait on a moving screen or platform, not letting you be Yoshi or Nabbit without the stupid handicap, or in co-op, if you want to change the controls, it changes them for all players. Come on Nintendo, really? But the biggest letdown was the bosses. All of them. Total weak sauce. Oh well, they were only a small part of an otherwise great Mario game. It's Metroidvania time once again. This time though, we have what might be the most adorable Metroidvania ever made, Alice Escaped. This chibi anime-style Alice in Wonderland-inspired game puts you in the shoes of Usada and Kotora, two girls studying in the library who find a strange book with a note inside that says, "Find Alice." Next thing they know, they're transported into the Wonderland with brand new get-ups and decide to chase down the rabbit they saw when they arrived. I don't want to say any more on the story, as it's best for you to discover it yourself, because this game does some interesting things with dialogue options and has a unique way of integrating multiple endings and New Game Plus. The artwork in the game is incredibly cute, and the environments are surprisingly beautiful, with a striking style in each region. Like any good Metroidvania, it's a lot of fun to discover the out-of-the-way secrets tucked away in hidden corners of the map as you unlock more items and abilities. The combat works very well for the most part, but I had a few hang-ups with it, such as the unnecessary amount of hit stun each of the melee attacks have that threw me off quite a few times. Every now and then you'll get locked into deathmatch zones where you have to kill every enemy before it lets you move on, and while you're in one of those, you can't pause this single-player game. Which then caused me to discover that when you do pause elsewhere, everything is still moving, meaning you can still get attacked. I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but aside from a few hangups, I loved it quite a lot. It's short and sweet if you want it to be, or you can go the extra mile and try for all the alternate endings. Either way, it's my second favorite Metroidvania of 2023. Yep, there's one more. Stay tuned. So you're telling me there's a Vampire Survivors clone that's all about Hololive VTubers that's completely free? I'm not even a VTuber fan, but sign me the hell up anyway. HoloCure is basically that. Vampire Survivors, but with VTubers instead of Castlevania ripoff sprites. And it was awesome. Almost as fun as Vampire Survivors, but there's a few things holding it back. When I played it initially, it had just been released on Steam, and was technically still in early access at version 0.6, even though it already felt like a feature-complete game even at that point. But that's ultimately why I'm considering this as an honorable mention. It's not finished, but I probably won't play it this year as much as I did in 2023. It had a whopping 38 different characters to choose from, with different stats, skills, and a personalized main weapon and special attack that make each character actually unique to play as. I'd say that's the biggest strength of the game, whereas in Vampire Survivors, the characters only specialized in one generic weapon that anyone can use, at least for the most part, till they added a bunch of content later on. The two biggest things that detract from the game in my opinion were the lack of stages, with only 4 unique ones and 3 extra hard mode versions, and the Hollow House side content thing, where they allow you to do farming and fucking fishing? Why?
Stop it.
Oh well. Even with these things, it still felt like a very competent and complete game, even though it was free and not even finished when I played it. If there's one game on this list that I had a difficult time finding a spot for, it's this one, and it might surprise some people that it isn't higher on the list. The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Man, do I have a lot to say about this game, but I'll try to keep this short. Breath of the Wild was a fun game, but not my favorite in the series by any means, so I was already lukewarm on the idea that the follow-up would be more of the same. The best improvements were the quantity of new content added on top of the previous game, which can keep you busy for over 200 hours if you want it to, and the new powers you get, especially the Ultra Hand, that turn this whole world into an insane playground with endless possibilities. In theory. In order to get to a point where you have a decent amount of freedom, you have to get through a 3 to 4 hour tutorial, then spend a lot of time traversing the same world all over again, unlocking each fast travel point, then upgrading your battery to be able to actually do things with your Ultra Hand contraptions. Unless you learn how to make this thing that breaks the game and trivializes literally everything. At that point, when I had uncovered the entire map and all of the underground, it was kinda unfulfilling. Which was why my favorite new addition had to be the Islands in the Sky, as they required you to use the resources at hand rather than just being cheap. Unfortunately, they were only a small new portion of the game, compared to the Underground, which was utterly disappointing due to just being a mirror of the overworld with the same environment throughout the entire thing, but really dark, with a lot of annoying enemies. Speaking of which, due to the combat being pretty much the same, it got annoying and tedious really fast, and I found myself just skipping over any content I could get away with, about a third into my total playtime of 160 hours. If I had to pick some highlights, it would have to be that the dungeons in this game were decent, with my favorite being the Wind Temple. But the bosses were disappointing, with maybe 2 exceptions. And neither of them were the final boss. Unfortunately, the overall story didn't really make up for it, even if it was more interesting than the previous game. Tears of the Kingdom is still a fun game despite my gripes about it, but also another example of why Nintendo needs to release better hardware because man, lots of performance issues with this one. It seems like they want to move on from this version of Hyrule after this, which is good, but we'll have to see how it actually turns out. So I had to rewrite this entry before making this video because it's Trails into Reverie. Since I played it and originally wrote my thoughts on it, I've made a bunch more content on this series, but I think this is the only Trails game I haven't talked about all that much on this channel, other than taking a pot shot at the shitty fan service minigame in my least favorite moments video. But after playing this one, I also played the 2 Kuro games that follow, which kind of flipped my perception of this series on its head, and made me realize how much missed potential this game's story has. It's kind of a filler game, with the only interesting parts being when you take control of the new protagonist, C. But his story is so short here. I can't really go into details about this game's story because you should only really play this game if you've played pretty much all 9 other Trails games that came before it, to be honest. All I'll say is that the overall story and how events play out is just way too safe, and underwhelming as hell. The game does shine elsewhere though, and that's in its gameplay, including a randomized dungeon crawling aspect that gives you access to tons of characters, allowing you to customize and deck them out as much as you see fit, then carry over everything into some very extensive New Game Plus difficulty options. That was where I spent most of my time with this one by far. It has some similarities to Trails in the Sky III, which is still my favorite game in the series, so it definitely made me feel at home with it. I do feel bad for the people who play the official release of this game, however. NISA really fucked this one up in multiple ways, which is why I'm glad I just played the fan translation instead, because after doing some more digging this year, I don't consider any of these localizations canon anymore. I'm done huffing the copium for these companies because they're all trash. But that's another story. Go play Trails in the Sky if you haven't yet. And don't forget to check out my other non-spoiler videos on the series if you want to learn more, or check out my other Trails videos like my top 10 favorite and least favorite moments if you're familiar with the series. The Talos Principle 2. A sequel to a game I never would have said needs a sequel. If you haven't played the first one, I strongly recommend you forget the fact that this sequel exists and go play the first one yourself. It's a game that I think everyone should play, regardless of the type of gamer you are, because it's truly a one-of-a-kind experience. With that out of the way, let's talk about the sequel. Obviously, since this game isn't higher on the list, I don't hold it in quite as high regard as the first game. The main difference is that it's no longer a solitary, ethereal, immersive experience. There's NPCs, there's a direct story, there's side plots and different things to do other than solve puzzles. To be honest, I didn't care for this. Dialogue is reminiscent of the horrible way that Oblivion worked, and it's all just so uncanny. The story started off pretty weak, with a ton of heavy-handed environmentalism being a big point of focus, and while the locations and the environments were expansive and very, very nice to look at, it made getting from place to place a chore, and finding hidden objects around the world unbearable. But the more I played this game, the more I appreciated it for what it was. It's different from the first game, but has its own merits the first game does not have. I appreciated each location and the way everything was designed the more I played. The characters grew on me the more I talked to them and the more they gave their thoughts on various subjects, and the way each subject, including the environmentalism, was brought up. It allows you to form your own thoughts, rather than being preachy, so the story got more interesting the deeper I got into it. By the time I got to the end, I had changed my mind on the decision. If you've played it, you know what I mean. But what about the most important aspect of the game? The puzzles. Well, I certainly enjoyed them. Overall, this game was a lot easier than the first one. I got stuck for a while on a few of them, especially that golden door puzzle in the west, but I stuck with it, and was still able to complete everything without looking anything up. Might be because I had some experience carry over from the first game, but getting those stars in the first game was a bitch without a guide. This was nothing compared to that. The only thing I had to look up was where a hidden object was in the west, because the locations are so large, trying to find the hidden extras was a tedious nightmare due to the map's size. It felt like I spent more time walking around and talking to NPCs than actually doing the puzzles, so that was kind of a letdown. The only other disappointment was the performance this game has when you don't have an SSD. Lots of loading and pop-in issues that make the experience a bit worse than it should be, even though there isn't a whole lot going on at any given time. But overall, I consider it a worthy sequel to the first game. I played Disgaea 7, Vows of the Virtueless, against my better judgment, because, like any Disgaea game, say goodbye to 300 plus hours. But also, to me, this one was looking very unimpressive before launch. This was a bit of a weird one, as it had just come off of the previous Disgaea 6 that had a lot of changes, and fully transitioned from sprites to 3D models for the first time in series history, so it did feel a little bare bones compared to the 5th game. Fortunately, this game added a ton of new features and brought back a lot of old character classes, some of which I did not expect to return, like the male archer from Disgaea 3, as well as some new ones too, so it was nice to see that. But before you get into the meat of the game, you have to get through the main story, and it's fucking garbage. No, seriously, I think this might be the worst story in the series so far, which was really disappointing. At least, in a game such as this, it's salvageable, because a lot more time is spent just customizing your characters in the post-game, which is why it's so high on the list. If that part of Disgaea doesn't appeal to you like it does to me, then I cannot recommend this game. I didn't like all the characters all that much, and the localization is borderline insufferable, with the exception of maybe Perilika, whose VA sounded like she was having a lot of fun the whole time, and even I will admit it was pretty contagious. There's a few other problems I had, such as the jumpification system probably being the worst gameplay addition I can think of, because it removes so much of the strategy aspect that each battle becomes a pure numbers game, rather than encouraging you to be creative in how to take out stronger enemies. The main story's difficulty is also all over the damn place, which was weird. If I had to pick one thing I did like the most, it would have to be the addition of item reincarnation, which allows you to upgrade items into higher ranked items while carrying over some of the stats and traits, if you're lucky at least. The way it works in this one is a little half-baked because you might not get to upgrade it to the one you want. In fact, you most likely won't. So trying to create a specific super powerful item can be a bit more troublesome in this game. Hopefully in the next one, they can improve upon the good stuff they added and make it even more fun, like re-adding weapon color variations based on rarity. A very minor thing to be honest, but one that I obsess over in the older games more than I'd like to admit.
You traveled through space, I smelled you right away.
Ow? What are you doing here?
If there's one game from 2023 I really did not expect to love, it's Dave the Diver. Though I should have expected it because there seems to be a theme with a lot of my favorite games of each year being those genre-fusing games that shouldn't work on paper, but it just works. It's full of charm and silly characters, with the main guy, Dave, being a fat dude who loves to eat and is fascinated with sea creatures. Wow, I feel represented. God, that sounds so stupid to say. People really care about this shit?
I'm retarded?
Anyway, Dave's job is to dive into the sea in this blue hole that has some strange phenomena going on, gather up some seafood with his harpoon, return to the surface, then have the chef Bancho turn it all into edible goodies at their restaurant, where it opens at night, and you have to serve the customers in a minigame of sorts. That's the basic cycle of this game, but you'll also unlock the ability to hire staff, open a fish hatchery, grow some crops for some more complex recipes, and even open a second branch of the restaurant. Also, the more money you earn and the more objectives you complete, the more places you'll be able to unlock under the sea, and the more upgrades Dave will be able to add to his toolset. It's a very clever mix of Metroidvania and management sim, but with a bit of roguelite elements. If that sounds daunting, it's really not. This is definitely more of a casual game, as even if you fail, you just keep going anyway, and just have fun. Which is fortunate because my controller started drifting like mad while playing this game and caused me to die a lot more. Sad. It will get more intense the deeper you go into the ocean, of course. And there is a main story to this game that was a lot longer than I expected, with tons of side quests and objectives. The main issue I did have was that the actual size of everything you explore is rather small considering you're supposed to go into it over and over again. And they tried to mitigate this by having a little variation of the layout every now and then that's kinda randomized. But then I'd say the only reason it started to feel repetitive was because of how surprisingly long the game is. Still, it was very satisfying getting everything down, and I even continued playing the game for a bit after I beat it, until a glitch took away like 30,000 of my money out of nowhere. Oh well. Maybe it's been fixed since then, and if so, I can easily recommend it to just about anybody. Tevi, the long-awaited follow-up to the cult classic Rabby Ribby, is the best Metroidvania of 2023, and possibly one of the best Metroidvanias ever made. At least, if we look at it somewhat objectively. There's a few things that hold it back for me on this list, but despite that, it was a lot of fun from start to finish, despite being one of the longest Metroidvanias I have ever played. The story here was surprisingly deep and well thought out, and despite its cute and funny bunny girl appearance, it can get surprisingly dark and violent at times. I don't want to spoil anything here, but I think it has the best story out of all the games I played in 2023. Despite being a Metroidvania, there are a lot of dialogue scenes, and at some points I kept thinking they were dragging for too long, but I can't really complain now. But even without the story segments, this game's map is very large and will keep you busy for hours, possibly over 30 if you want to go for 100% without a guide. The combat also keeps itself interesting throughout the entire game by giving you a ton of options to customize your abilities. Like, there are a massive amount of sigils to use that can change the approach to combat to your liking. That said, at least after playing the game on normal, I don't think it was balanced all that well because I never died once. The only time I got close to dying was when I found my way to a dangerous zone before I was supposed to be there. But the bosses were kind of disappointing because of this, despite being the highlight of the previous game, and I could just mindlessly mash away at them until their HP dropped to 0, while still having Tevi at over 80% HP for most of them. Maybe that's my own fault for not upping the difficulty, I guess, but I refrained from doing so due to the damage sponge nature that the enemies had. Just keep this in mind if you decide to play it.
どういうことですか？天使ってあんたの足元。うわ、ごめんなさい。パニクってたんで気づいてませんでした。
Being evil is more fun. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it.
I just want to attack other people, and I want to kill other people, and I want to create conflict.
So when a little game called Dungeons 4 fell into my lap thanks to my research making the RNG series, I twirled my non-existent mustache with toxic delight. But it didn't really feel all that evil to play through the game, to be honest, because this game is goofy as hell. The game is narrated by an old man who makes terrible jokes and pop culture references. The heroes you fight against are dumbasses that aren't all that good anyway. The main character, Talia, is also kind of a dumbass cartoon villain at best. And so, the overall story was a total joke. Your enjoyment may vary. I just went with it, and ended up getting one of the most purely fun RTS games I have ever played. Which isn't really saying much because I'm only personally acquainted with a handful, but still. I could not put this game down and played it for hours and hours, even pulling an all-nighter once or twice. The game is split between two layers, the underground, where you carve out your dungeon base, and the overworld, where the hero settlements are. Your goal is to build up your dungeon by mining and producing resources, digging out space for your units, resources, and traps to take care of those pesky hero invaders, and then destroy everything up top to win. Simple in concept, but in execution, this game can get pretty difficult due to having to manage multiple things simultaneously, especially considering one of your most important resources, evilness, is gathered by committing evil deeds against the heroes, mostly in the overworld, and is used for all the important upgrades you need for your evil armies. During the campaign, the difficulty is all over the place, but it's manageable. Each campaign mission also has a unique gimmick to deal with that keeps it fresh throughout the entire game. Once you get the basics down and get in tune with the flow of the game, it's incredibly satisfying to pull off even the most difficult missions very quickly. The biggest problem the game has is on the technical side. It's a complex 3D game made with Unity, so it runs like ass. With not a lot of lower graphics settings, and the longer your play session, the worse it runs, until it crashes about an hour and 45 minutes in, at least for me. You can get around the crash using a quick save, but it will still run like ass. Another big issue I've seen people mention is that compared to the previous dungeon games, this one isn't much of an upgrade. But since it was the first one I played, I had so much fun with it, I can't really complain. I hope they can get out of the trap that Unity is becoming and make the next one even better.
the dwarven equipment spectacularly went up in flames, which was rather odd, as the creatures had only been hitting the thing with their weapons. But fine, perhaps Horde weapons were made of flint.
What you're about to see is an extremely, extremely violent game. What you are also about to see is me sucking colossal dick at it. You've been warned, especially for the latter. I don't play shooters very often, but occasionally one appears out of nowhere that does something interesting and convinces me to try it out. In 2020, it was Doom Eternal. In 2021, it was Halo Infinite. In 2022, it was Metal Hellsinger. In 2023, it was Trepang 2. This game definitely takes a few pages out of Doom's book, and most people compare it to a game called Fear, but I'm not familiar with that one. Still, it creates something entirely new with an interesting story. You are a super soldier who escaped from a facility due to unknown means, and your entire campaign involves working with a secret organization to take out some horrible experiments while getting sweet revenge. The story is light in this game, but it still manages to be pretty interesting, as this is one of those games where there is obviously more than meets the eye. But the main attraction here is the action. The amount of ways you can take out your enemies is what keeps this game incredibly fun from start to finish. You can cloak yourself and sneak around, you can run and gun like a psychopath, you can use explosives to create a shower of blood everywhere, you can slide into your enemies to send them flying, and you can slow time, turning you into a superhuman murder machine for a brief period of time. Which might sound broken, but it's not, because to gain more time with this power, you have to get quite a few kills first. But there are also some segments in this game that really surprised me, where you really do not feel like an all-powerful superhuman at all, and, well, you'll have to see that for yourself. The game was made by a small team, but it looks very nice, even when I turned some of the graphics settings down. But I didn't even have to do very much, and it still ran very well on my aging GTX 1070. It's pretty impressive how many options you have here, and it even has a bevy of cheats for you to unlock as you play the game, that will remind you of the good old days. Plus, the game's soundtrack is incredible, and probably would have been very high on my soundtracks list if I had played it before then. Brandon McKagan may be the next Mick Gordon at this rate. I can't praise this game enough. However, I also feel like I'm unqualified to criticize this game. Even though there are other games I liked more, I can't really explain it other than shooter games just aren't really my thing, and I haven't really played one like this before. So whatever flaws there may be, I probably didn't notice any of them. Still, if you're a fan of shooters of any kind, I can confidently say you really should check this game out. I never thought I would say this, but they finally made an Atelier game worthy of being called great. Up until this point, each game in the series was just good, sometimes mid, with the third game in previous trilogies being the worst of them. But Atelier Ryza 3 broke this curse for me and goes above and beyond anything in the series we've seen so far. That said, do not play this one without playing the previous two. I've made a video about that. This one takes place a couple years after Atelier Ryza 2, where she returns home to Kirkin Island, and a mysterious and dangerous landmass appears in the waters nearby that were previously used for trade and travel. It's up to Ryza to use her alchemy and other resources such as the mysterious keys to figure out what's going on. The previous two Ryza games were much smaller in scale and fairly linear, unlocking each small segment as you go along the main story. In this one, you have the entirety of the first game's map to go out and explore from the start, plus new additions to it. And each time you unlock a new area, it's mostly open for you to go wherever you want without having to strictly follow your main objectives. It's a semi-open world, so some areas will be unavailable till later, and you unlock multiple regions of a similar scale to the entirety of previous games, making it more than double or possibly triple the size overall. This works very well in the series' favor, and they should continue doing it this way. One of the most fun aspects of the Atelier series is using the alchemy system to customize your experience, going out to gather materials to synthesize customizable items and equipment to use in your adventure. Having a massive open world to do this in is way more fun than going to certain small areas over and over again to get more materials. The way it's laid out like this actively encourages you to min-max and break the game in all the right ways, and it's so incredibly satisfying in this one. Unfortunately, the game's combat is not balanced at all for people who play like I do, meaning I was destroying everything in sight in one turn, even in the final dungeon, even on the hardest difficulty available from the start. Which means yes, they did the dumb thing again of locking an even harder difficulty behind completing the story.
Stop! Stop! No, stop!
But the game's combat is still kind of messy, but not bad, and it only took me 3 games to figure out what the main problem was. The camera. If I could just see what was happening on the battlefield instead of closely following the active character, while they are moving about and spamming particle effects, it would be much less of a mess, and easier to understand for players starting out, which is a complaint I've seen online. I can point out little flaws with this game and series all day, such as the awkwardly bad translation, but what matters most is that this game is just fun as hell, and never stops being fun. I spent over 110 hours on this game, which is the longest I've spent on an Atelier game by far. Even the story finally went in an interesting direction for a change, whereas the previous 2 were just meh, and ended in a very satisfying and sentimental way. It shows throughout the game that the developers put a lot of love and passion into it. I really hope this series continues to follow in this game's footsteps and become even greater and more cohesive, because now, this is the best game in the entire series. Too bad the next game is straight up mobile gacha trash, so now the series is dead to me.
They betrayed me, they didn't keep their promise, they tricked me and I don't care anymore.
Fuck off, Koei Tecmo. Number 2 is a game that I ruined my sleep schedule over, and got so addicted to that I neglected basic functions such as eating, and possibly developed GERD as a result. Isn't that great?
Get some help.
Against the Storm. This is a city builder / survival game with roguelite elements, set in a world where a cursed storm is destroying and corrupting the land, except the one final stand in the smoldering city, where you are tasked by the Queen with leading groups into the storm to work your way to seal the curse once more. Almost everything except your bare essentials is randomized. The types of buildings you can build, the species of villagers you have, the layout and starting conditions of each map, and the dangers that await you. The goal is to complete each map in as few in-game years as possible, otherwise you won't be able to reach the seal in time before the Great Storm comes and resets everything. But if you do manage to do it, you'll have a few more years to make it to the next seal that's further out. If that sounds like this game will be very time-consuming, well, that's because it is. But man, it's so damn addicting. Consider that a warning if this game sounds like it appeals to you, because getting to the end will take a long time, partially because this game is very stingy with EXP. The game also has a total of 24 difficulty settings, and you will not want to start on anything but the lowest setting at first, until you break the first seal, and get used to the unique style of management in this game. You might get into habits or a comfortable build surviving each map, but it's designed well enough that you will probably be able to pull through using whatever blueprints and perks you happen to get. Just don't get reckless cutting your way into the dangerous glades too early, otherwise those can screw you over horribly. But that's also the one thing that could have used more variety, the glade events, because you'll be coming across the same ones over and over across each run. There's also not much story here other than what I mentioned earlier, but that's okay. It's not important when you're spending countless hours seeing what's in store for you in the next map, and the next map, and the next map. Only thing holding it back from being number 1 is that sometimes it's hard to tell if it's actually fun, or just horrendously addicting. I didn't know what I was getting into with this game, but this soundtrack really got me into it from the start. I never would have imagined loving a roguelite game as much as The Last Spell. It's also another one of those games that fuses several genres together to make something unique, and this one just clicked with me very well, very early on. The Last Spell is a dark fantasy game about a post-apocalyptic event that wipes out much of humanity and turns them into evil creatures of the night, preying on the rest of the survivors throughout the land. It's up to you to command the last remaining heroes to stem the tide of zombies threatening the remains of each town, while the last mages work in the center to seal the powers that caused all of this destruction. You start out each map with 3 randomized heroes, and have them use their skills, which are tied to their weapons of choice, to slaughter anything that creeps out of the dark mist that covers the land. In between each wave, you can build houses, mines, and other things to give you bonuses and abilities, buy and scavenge for more equipment, and hire more heroes once you unlock the ability. You can also build defenses such as walls, siege weapons, and traps to help you, giving the game tower defense-like mechanics, something that I actually like to see in this strategy genre more often, I think. If you can survive long enough, which is usually up to 10 waves, you will then have to take down a boss on the last wave that, in my experience, will stretch your resources extremely thin, and probably cause massive damage to your heroes and your town in the process. But once you get them down, it's incredibly satisfying. However, this is a roguelite game. If you lose, it's back to wave 1. Getting to the final wave of any particular stage can take hours, so the pressure to keep your units alive is massive, sweat-inducing, and caused me to obsessively tinker and min-max as much as possible. But doing so is also what got me through the game with relatively few total losses. It's still a double-edged sword, as the longer you spend on a particular map, the more devastating it is to lose it. The 4th map took me 23 hours to beat, and thankfully, I was able to beat it on my first try due to my obsessiveness. But if I had lost it, man, that would have sucked. Though even if you lose, you unlock permanent upgrades throughout the game that make your loss much less painful. And honestly, even losing after enduring for a long-ass time didn't feel frustrating at all. It just encourages you to keep going regardless. And keep going I did, spending probably 200 hours on this game before I beat it. I think a big reason this game clicked with me so well was because it gives you a bit of a power trip in a similar way Disgaea does, with over-the-top, overpowered units with attacks that cover wide areas, making it really satisfying to take down mobs of enemies. But there's so much more to this game's strategy than that it never gets old or tiresome even after hundreds of hours playing it. All of these things come together to make something greater than the sum of its parts, and I hope it gets a follow-up of some kind. But for now, game the fuck on. There you have it. That was my top games of 2023. It's becoming a bit of a trend for me that most of my favorite games of the year tend to be those interesting genre-fusing experiences that feel very fresh. There were more of them this time though. Dave the Diver, Against the Storm, The Last Spell. Maybe you could argue Tears of the Kingdom as well? There were some that I didn't get to play too, such as Hi-Fi Rush. Maybe some other time. But anyway, here's all the other games I played in 2023. Spark the Electric Jester. Little Noah, Scion of Paradise. Dragon Quest Builders 2, which I've made 2 videos about, go check them out. Disgaea 2, Dark Hero Days. Art and Ellico, Melody of Alemia, and Art and Ellico 2, Melody of Metafalica, but with the fan relocalization this time, which was a much better experience. Disgaea 6, Defiance of Destiny, which I used to kill time while I was out of town. My poor Switch. Medieval Dynasty, which keeps getting updates 2 years later, which is cool. Titan Quest. The Legend of Heroes Kuro no Kiseki, and Legend of Heroes Kuro no Kiseki 2 Crimson Sin, with fan translation patches which I've also made a few videos about, go check them out, but only if you've played them. And lastly, obviously, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. My favorites out of these that I played for the first time are probably Titan Quest and Kuro no Kiseki 1. Titan Quest really surprised me and made me feel like I was back in the good old days. I really hope they do Titan Quest 2 justice. And if you've seen my video from a few months back, you already know how I feel about Kuro. Thanks for watching if you stuck through this entire thing. 2024 doesn't seem to have as many interesting things to be excited about compared to last year, but we'll see. Dragon's Dogma 2 looks really good at least. About damn time for that one. If only Crapcom will stop being Crapcom.
You went full retard, man.
Anyway, let me know in the comments if you decide to try out anything on this list, or feel free to ask any questions about the games. What are your top games of 2023? What are you looking forward to in 2024? Did any of my choices make you salty? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button, share the video around, subscribe for more nonsense from me, follow me on the Twitter, or X, even though I never post there, Rumble and Odyssey. Have a tremendous, stupendous new year, and as always, my fellow goats, have high standards, low expectations.